Welcome to a new edition. I'm NADIA and this week we're putting the focus on how the French are handling the Covid-19 effect on their love lives. Like elsewhere, the experience of a global health crisis has taken its toll on relationships, not least during lockdown. Whether it meant spending every waking hour with a partner or being kept apart for months on end, no French couple has come out the other side unchanged. In fact, divorce rates are on the rise here. Let's start with a few accounts of how that challenge played out.
You are off today, right?
It has become a daily ritual. Arthur Combe shares a tender moment with his fiancée by video.
Yeah, promise.
For she's in Israel and he's in France. They were supposed to get married this summer, but the coronavirus pandemic kept that from happening. Traveling between the two countries still isn't allowed. The couple haven't seen each other since February.
Yes, I miss you too.
It's difficult. There are highs and lows. If only we had a set date that we could hold on to, then we could count down. What allows us to hold on is our wedding, our plans together, our desire to have children and create a family. We aren't worried about our relationship as long as we trust each other and we're on the same wavelength and have the same desires.
Shared interests. That's what was lacking for Nathalie and her partner. Married for 30 years, this mother of two children decided to leave her husband after the lockdown.
It wasn't sudden. Every day I would increasingly ask myself, what am I going to say to him? Why don't we talk? What's happening here? What do we have left? That's why I decided to call it quits.
Like Natalie, 1 in 10 couples decided to separate following the coronavirus lockdown, according to a poll by IFOP. Meanwhile, for other couples, the long weeks spent at home together brought them closer. In a relationship for the past 2.5 years, Charlotte and Altus spent 2 months far from Paris in a rental property.
It's true. The fact that we weren't at the office or traveling, that we were together, it created another dynamic as a couple.
It brought us close enough to be ready to get married. I asked for Charlotte's hand on May the 8th. The lockdown made me more sure when you're happy and together 24/7, there was no doubt.
Altus and Charlotte decided there's no need to wait to tie the knot. Nearly everything is already set for their upcoming wedding.
Well, to help us understand the deeper impact of this experience, we spoke to couple counsellor KRUZE, who's the author of a relationship guide entitled We Need to Talk.
Clearly, couples who were already in trouble before the crisis saw the lockdown confirm their issues and even put a magnifying glass on them. So those people are now separating. Another setup is couples who were struggling but managing to stay together because they had a life outside of the relationship, be it professional, cultural, but finding themselves stuck together one-on-one for 2 months straight, deprived of their usual forms of escapism, made the deeper issues in their relationship unescapable. And some of those couples are now thinking of separating. But there are also some couples who really made the most of confinement. It wasn't a negative experience for everyone. In fact, I'd say it was a particularly good time for jealous types, as it fulfilled their fantasy of having their partner for themselves at all times. It was an absolute dream for them. They didn't even have to justify their possessive attitude. But the real trouble for jealous partners comes when the lockdown ends. Talking is essential for couples who are struggling, but it was also important for those who managed to take advantage of the lockdown to reassess certain things. It's always important to address what doesn't work in a relationship, but it's also interesting to say, okay, on such and such an issue, such as kids or sharing the burden of housework, this difficult period showed us it's possible for us to make adjustments and changes and thereby avoid conflict. And being able to adapt in that way will serve the relationship moving forward.
those relationships that have weathered the storm, another hurdle may have cropped up. Wedding bells are few and far between, as many marriage and honeymoon plans have fallen foul to the crisis, at a huge loss for French venues and service providers.
It's the first wedding of the year for these caterers, but the kitchen is unusually quiet.
Aujourd'hui, il y a 3 cuisiniers qui produisent pour la prestation de demain pour les mariages. Habituellement, ils sont 17 en cuisine. On fait à peu près 6-7 mariages par samedi. Là, aujourd'hui, on va faire un mariage de 80 personnes.
That's a fraction of the food and place settings for 1,500 guests that they normally prepare each week this time of year. As weddings are cancelled and pushed back, the company has lost 90% of its turnover and put 90% of its workers on part-time unemployment.
Si l'activité en janvier avait du mal à reprendre, ça veut dire que je serais soit obligé de diminuer les équipes et de me séparer d'un certain nombre de collaborateurs, soit changer d'activité et faire autre chose, mais ça va être très très compliqué.
For venues too, the financial shock has been considerable. Historic sites like this chateau in the Loire Valley often depend on weddings and other events to fund renovations. Since the start of the year, it's achieved just 1/10 of its usual turnover.
On avait des mariages de Hong Kong, de Chine, du Vietnam, de l'Australie, des États-Unis et un autre d'Allemagne. Tout ça a été annulé.
Though most couples are putting off the big day till next year, some have decided to forge ahead. These two are getting married at the end of November, and choosing a wedding ring might turn out to be the easiest part.
Le traiteur, il a fermé. Du coup, voilà, on doit retrouver un traiteur. Bon, après ça, je pense qu'on va trouver vite, mais voilà, c'est compliqué.
It's cost this jeweller tens of thousands of euros to erase and re-engrave the dates on numerous rings for weddings which have been postponed.
Énormément de personnes ont voulu garder la date de leur mariage initial et rajouter juste la nouvelle date en souvenir d'une période inédite.
Some lovebirds just couldn't wait. Only the close family of Augustine and Laurent are there to witness their union and must of course follow all the safety guidelines.
Il m'est absolument impossible de marier un couple qui tient à 1 mètre l'un de l'autre. Donc, Covid ou pas, je vais vous demander de vous rapprocher un tout petit peu.
The newlyweds are of course allowed one free pass.
Unis par le mariage.
Now, our overview of love under COVID would of course be incomplete without the perspective of those looking for love. To tell us about the difficulty of starting up a romance in the midst of a health crisis, I've come to meet blogger LOUISA, whose podcast Single Jungle has served as a sounding board for would-be lovers. Hello, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Now, as hinted on the collage we have behind us here, has this pandemic redefined the dating game?
Totally. When you meet someone now, you have to wear a mask and you no longer have that first contact of a kiss on the cheek. And for France, that's a real culture shock. And like in the artwork behind us, there's the constant threat of the virus floating between us, which means you have to take into account a whole new medical aspect, and that's just not sexy.
And has that been your experience as well?
Yes, I've been on 2 dates since the end of lockdown, and there's immediately a sense of keeping one's distance. No bees, no touching. The sensual aspect of meeting someone is eradicated, and just thinking, I like this guy, I'd like to kiss him, becomes problematic, so I hold back.
Now, dating apps were very popular, especially during confinement, but they have had to adapt. Tell us how.
Alors pour certaines applications, elles ont proposé par exemple la
Some
vidéo.
dating apps started using video chats, which they didn't before.
Il y avait des jeux, beaucoup d'innovations.
There were also a lot of quizzes, games. All these new features were aimed at keeping users online. That and the constant notifications telling people, go on the app, you're not alone.
Mais on a pu remarquer
So it did make room for more dialogue. But as many of my listeners told me, there was also a negative comforter effect. People were chatting to keep busy and feel less lonely. But when lockdown was over and it was time to take things forward in real life, they'd get ghosted. That's rough.
And do you see long-term this situation, this crisis, changing the way the French approach relationships?
The French enjoy the art of seduction, and it used to be very spontaneous and easy, including on apps, where you could meet up within minutes of being put in touch. My guess is that some people will stick to that you only live once approach and go back to their old ways. But I think the majority will be more cautious to protect their own health, but also that of their loved ones. So we'll just have to take our time, and perhaps romance will come back into fashion.
LOUISA, AMARA, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's be selfish. Let's just be love.
And it's with this work by street artist In Love and dedicated to his girlfriend that we kiss goodbye to this edition. Stay tuned and stay safe.
It must be about 9:30 or 9:20 or so. The first call came to me that from one of my colleagues that there's a shooting going on inside the hotel. I told him just switch off the light and just close the door.
On November 26, 2008, 10 armed men terrorized a city of 20 million people.
When they walked in, within that 4 minutes, they fired about 120 rounds of bullets. Is the bullet mark over here also on that thing over there?
Mumbai suffered the worst terrorist attack in its history. Today, the people of India's economic and cultural capital are still struggling to come to terms with what happened.
The Mumbai terror attacks revisited all this week here on France 24.